everyone. We'll get started now. It's just 6 p.m. Thank you all for tuning in this evening for CSI Pacific's Sport Performance Speaker Series webinar. We're lucky enough to have two of CSI Pacific's mental performance consultants here tonight to speak about effective communication in sport. I think this is an incredibly important topic, and I'm so excited to hear what these experts have to say. For those tuning in to a live presentation for the first time, please feel free to type in the chat box at any time questions you might have for Danelle or Christie, and they'll try to answer them as they come up. Also, this presentation will be recorded and posted on our on-demand speaker series webpage for those wanting to rewatch anything. You can also email me after this presentation if you would like access to the PowerPoint, and I can send that to you as well. A little background on Danelle and Christie before we dive into their presentation. Danelle Kabush is a dynamic speaker and educator with a PhD in sports psychology. For over a decade, Danelle has worked with performing artists and national team athletes in biathlon, cross-country skiing, speed skating, cycling, athletics, triathlon, and rowing. As a sports psychology consultant with the Canadian Sport Institute and in private practice as a registered clinical counselor, Danelle enjoys the collaborative process of helping athletes, coaches, and support staff prepare for the psychological pressures of major competitions, such as team selections, world championships, and Olympic Games. Over to Christie Gialloreto. She's been in private practice for over 20 years and a consultant with Pisces since 2008. She has counseled individual athletes, performing artists, coaches, parents, and teams in multiple sports, ranging from recreational to professional. Working in a collaborative manner, clients learn personalized practical methods to integrate mental skills and tools into their daily training routines for enhanced performance and personal growth. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here tonight. And without further ado, Danelle and Christie, take it away.
Thank you, Kendra. Appreciate it. Really do appreciate this opportunity too. Looking forward to it. Danelle and I have had the opportunity to present this topic together in the past, and we've had a good time just working together and coming up with a lot of the different points and scenarios that we feel are important to address. I think this topic is very exciting for us because we see it every day in our practice. As integrated support team members with different national teams, as well as just our private practice consulting, we are able to observe a lot of the communication, let's say, practices within our clients and the interactions with parents and coaches and all the different stakeholders. It's also important for us to pay attention to how we communicate with our clients and all those people too in terms of being effective practitioners. So this is a really important topic for us. Just to overview, want to look at how communication does play a role in our sport and relationships, and understanding the purpose of the communication, why it works, when it doesn't, just having a broad scope visual of that. As well as we want to talk about a model that can be quite effective and provide some guidelines for you to use when communicating with those around you within the sports environment. I will just say straight off the top, this is a very complex topic, and there's so much to it. There's a lot of communication knowledge in the business world, and it's somewhat overwhelming if we even look into that direction. So we're just taking some pieces today to try to simplify it a little bit and give you a few tools to use going forward. One of the things that we will not focus too much on is the body language. We do know how big a communication tool that is and what impact it has, but we'll sort of look at it as a bit of an implied aspect, but so we won't focus on that specifically. Before we get started getting into the information, what's helpful for us is to pose a question to you guys. And want to hear a little bit about some of the pitfalls and some of the experiences you've had around communication. You know, what's piqued your interest to listen to us today? What kind of conversations do you have? I'm suspecting that there have been issues, so you're looking for some help. So maybe talking about some of the tough conversations or miscommunications that you've experienced. So we'll give you a chance to go ahead and type those in. You guys have been really great communicating with us so far, and we'll see what we get. We might be able to use those as some of our examples. So yeah, feel free to just type something in that you might just give us an example of what some of those difficult conversations or miscommunications that you do experience. And yeah, we'd like to hear from you guys, what you're interested in and what your experiences are. Okay, great. We're getting some people. Yeah, thank you. You're getting them typed in. We appreciate it. Those are some really good topics and issues to review. So I think what we'll try to do is address them throughout our conversation today. And if we don't get to them right away, for sure, let's make sure that you have some ideas before we sign off. So at the end, hopefully, we'll have a chance for some questions. But thank you for providing some of those. If you think of things as we're going along, feel free to go ahead and type them in. We'll keep an eye on that. So if we can just have a step back a little bit and just take a broad scope look at communication and consider what the general purpose of it is. Basically, it's passing information from one person to another. And if you look at all the different areas of communication, they're going to fall into these, let's say, these categories. Generally, when you're communicating with somebody, you're looking to motivate, to generate action. You're looking to inquire, to find something out, to learn something, to know something. You're looking to tell somebody information, to pass that on. And you're also looking to share, so a connection with others, really hoping to enhance and the relationships that you have with them. So this is a really broad scope. And some of the keys to this communication is to really just get your point across without causing misunderstandings. So it's vital to be clear and accurate. We know that doesn't always happen that way, but this is the basic areas of communication. Essentially, it's done to fulfill a need for yourself and others. So if you look at all those different things, the motivation, the inquiring, and the informing and sharing, it's hoping to fulfill a need. So let's take a look at the communication process. What this shows us is how vulnerable and how fragile this process can be when it comes to communicating. So if we take a look at our graph, we have the sender, that would be, let's say, you, and then the receiver is the person you're talking to. Could be a coach, could be parent, could be a teammate. But let's look at that. The sender is you. The encoding piece of this is how you choose to convey your message. So you're looking at the different words to use, what message you actually want to send. And so your skill set there is going to impact the success of the message. The message is then conveyed through a channel, which might be phone or face-to-face or through text or through just gesture and body language. And then the decoding aspect is how the receiver interprets that message. Okay, so then that gets back to the receiver. So if you look at this process, there's going to be what they call noise at any of these stages, which can interrupt the actual message that you are trying to get to. So you can see how things can get a little bit mixed up, how, if you throw in different personality types, if you throw in different emotional states in this, how things can be vulnerable to actually just getting your message across. A tone can also make a difference in this process. So it's really important to pay attention to these different areas and steps. And so we want to look at those today and see how we can clean that up a little bit. It's kind of fun when I meet with groups. We do a lot of exercises around communication, one being a favorite of mine that is simply just a paper tearing exercise. So what I'll do is I'll invite the team or the athletes and even parents, this is kind of fun with them too, to close their eyes and while they're holding a piece of paper, and I just guide them through an exercise that has them, fold the paper in half. They receive instructions and they just have to follow them. So it's, fold the paper in half, turn it 90 degrees, flip it over, tear the right top of the corner off, tear the bottom corner off. And I'm just giving some of the instructions. And of course, they're not allowed to be asking me questions other than to repeat the exercise. And so what happens is when we're done, we open our eyes and we see that everybody's paper is torn very differently because they have taken their own perspective at this exercise. So what we hear is the same thing. They've all heard the same instructions, but how we interpret them are very different. So there's a diverse results when they hold up the paper. And this is a great exercise for a lot of different aspects of around mental training, but this is a really good one for the communication to show how different people will interpret the same message. So let's take a look at some of the barriers that can get in the way of how these messages are delivered. So we've got here the 4 Ds that block connection, compassion, and effective communication. Essentially, what these do is it can create defensiveness in the receiver. It can create difficult relationships and lose trust because a lot of these are going to be sort of blame and judgment focused. So if we take a look at the first one, if you have somebody creating or communicating a bit of a diagnosis type of statement, it's judgment, it's analysis, it's criticism. So an example might be, let's say a swimming example where an athlete maybe isn't performing consistent times and the coach is getting frustrated. Maybe the coach is saying, you know what, she's lazy, she's always late for practice, and that's a blame and that's a judgment statement. And that for sure is going to bring up some defensiveness and make the trusting relationship between coach and athlete very difficult. The second one would be the denial of responsibility. Let's say the athlete says, well, it's coach's fault. Coach is not interesting. He's not teaching me well. He makes me feel bad all the time and practices are boring, right? So she's not taking responsibility for her own performance and what she is working on. So This third one is demand, and this is a very interesting one too, and it's when people are placing really rigid demands on others. And so an example might be, well, you have to make these splits or I won't put you in the race. So you won't be qualifying or, being invited to other meets. So this demand makes the communication very, very rigid and creates a lot of pressure for each, the athlete for one, but also just a very close-minded, no room for solution type of thing, message to the athlete and coach. The fourth one is deserving-oriented language. She deserved not to win. She's just deserving not to get her times. And that's based on that judgment again of, if she's not putting in the work, she doesn't deserve to get that success. So these are all very difficult barriers that can come up in the communication process. There are a few others that we want to introduce around sort of the listening side of things. So we'll get to those, but I want to turn it over to Danelle and look at how we can become better communicators in spite of all these barriers and the fragility of the process.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the practical approach side of things, and it's fun to see that you're continuing to put up some examples in the chat. So those are some great examples, and the model approach that we're going to introduce you to tonight is called nonviolent communication. And it's going to be some guidelines of how to express yourselves. We're going to focus on the expressing part, but we're also going to touch on how to hear what others have to say, what is difficult. And I'll get into, the term, the nonviolent communication is developed by someone called Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who's since passed away. He was the creator of it. He was best known for his work in conflict resolution. He created nonviolent communication based on his experiences with teaching mediation and communication skills while working with civil rights activists in the 60s. So his mission then was to help desegregate schools and other public institutions. He worked with educators, mental health professionals, public servants, prison officials and inmates, public figures, military, and police officers. So way outside of sport, but these principles can definitely apply. And the reason when we say, some of your examples are about what makes these expressing ourselves so honestly in some of these examples that you're sharing tonight is often we don't like to address conflict. It can be uncomfortable. We know that what we're saying might be hard for others to hear, like some of you are talking about giving feedback to a coach or talking to your parents about how you really feel. Sometimes we're uncomfortable making or worried that we're going to make others uncomfortable with what we have to say, and we're worried about how others will feel and how they'll respond to what we have to say. So that's part of what makes some of these conversations difficult. And so part of what we're trying to do in this type of communication is meet our own needs and what are the words that we can use to do that and keep people's defenses down and help others empathize with us and be able to express what our needs are. So we're going to get into, and conflict, I guess the last point on this slide, does often arise because we miscommunicate what are the needs we're really seeking. And Christie touched a bit on that with those 4 Ds, which can lead to miscommunication. So we'll move on to the next slide and just look at a few examples of when nonviolent communication is necessary, a good time to practice it. So sometimes, as in some of your examples, you might want to express yourself to someone after someone has said something. Perhaps they used words that you weren't comfortable with. Maybe it was an action someone took, a coach or a teammate that you wanted to address with someone. Or it might be a particular situation, maybe a selection process in sport, how much playing time you got, an interaction between teammates. So those are kind of different reasons where you might want to apply this type of communication in a difficult situation. So the next slide, I'm going to address briefly what this process or approach involves. There's 5 different parts to it, and we're going to go into more detail in the next slides, but the basis of it is the first thing is you might observe a situation. So this is the difficult part, is doing it without using judgmental or evaluating type of language. So think about an observation as something you could actually videotape, or you could see on camera. The next part of it is to identify, which is sometimes a tricky part. What is the feeling behind what you're trying to communicate? And think about feelings are always going to be emotions or feeling words that you use to describe the sensations in your own body. So they never involve others. And that's an important thing to remember here, is that you own your own feelings. So often when you think of your feelings being met in communication, in your relationships, feelings, you might have feelings of affection, you feel confident, you feel engaged, inspired, excited, exhilarated, grateful, hopeful, joyful, to name a few. And when your feelings aren't met, when your needs aren't met, you'll have feelings of being scared, annoyed, angry, confused, disconnected, embarrassed, sad, tense, things like that. So once you can identify what you're feeling, is say, what is the need behind this feeling? So, and again, it's about yourself, not about another. It's a basic, most needs are universal. We all have needs of acceptance, being included, being appreciated, connecting with others, community. We have needs for empathy, respect, support, trust, to name a few. And then the fourth step, briefly, is once you're aware of what you've observed, identifying your feeling, what is the need behind it, is to actually, this is a part we often skip when we're trying to have difficult conversations, because often we go straight to the evaluating or judging things, to say, what is what is the actual request? So once you've said all that, I would like you to do more of, or I need you to do this. Could you, if you're speaking to a coach, could you formulate your feedback using a different tone and things like that? So we'll get into more examples, like I said. And then the fifth step is to say, kind of check in with the person you're talking to, obtain some feedback. Am I on the right track with this conversation? Are you understanding what I'm trying to communicate, or how are we doing at resolving this issue? So that's a brief overview of the process. And now we're going to go into a few slides with some more examples. So I'm going to pass it back to Christie.
Okay, so looking at that first step around observations, like Danelle said, it's essentially you're just stating the facts. It's like something that you can observe within a video. So an expression might be, somebody might say, Janet's training too much, and that would come across as an evaluative type of statement, where we want to create it more into an observant, which is Janet has come to all the practices plus doing extra workouts on her own. And one of the key pieces to that is to not bring in a comparison to the past. It's very present and just strictly something that yourself and others could observe. So it's pretty straightforward like that. You want to just pay attention to not be including some of those barriers in terms of, passing judgment and you want to just be able to keep it very fact-oriented, because think of yourself as a receiver. Even if the observation is difficult to hear, you don't feel accused. You don't feel like somebody is, already creating an emotional response to you and pointing fingers at you. So it's going to be a healthier way to approach a conversation. So that will go into the feeling side of things.
Okay, thanks, Christie. I was just going to add, when you hear someone, and sometimes a way to, if you're on the other end of these types of conversations and someone's observing something you've done that they're not comfortable with, or it's a difficult thing to bring up, sometimes a way to, it can be hard to not get defensive and want to rationalize or default to justifying or explaining something you've done. But it's important to just listen to what their side of the story is. So if you're hearing someone on the other side, so you might just be reflecting back. So when you observed me doing this, or when you heard me say this, this is what you're seeing. So it's important to always keep in mind what side of the conversation, the other side of the conversation, which is the listening to the difficult side of the conversation. So Once you've gone past the second step is to clearly express what are the feelings. So how you feel, like I said, the emotion or sensation rather than the thought. So saying, you avoiding thinking words or I think this, but actually addressing the feeling. And I've just got a little dialogue here that I think can illustrate this a little bit. So it's a student in university. So some of you athletes on the call might be in school or university, and it's a friend talking to another student, trying to practice this idea of clearly identifying and expressing feelings. So the friend might say to the other one, okay, what is the behavior? So it's addressing an issue with a roommate. What is the behavior that your roommate does that you don't like? The student says back, he plays the radio late at night when I'm trying to sleep. So that might be the observation. The friend says, okay, now tell me, how do you feel when he does that? I feel it is wrong. So again, you can see there's a judgment there, but not really getting to the feeling. So then the friend says, I'm not making clear then what I mean by feelings. It's wrong is what I would call a judgment of the other person. I'm asking how you feel. What emotions do you feel? How do you feel? The student says, well, I think that when a person is so insensitive to other people, it's evidence of a personality disturbance. Friend says, hold it. You're still up in your head analyzing his wrongness. I'm asking, go into your heart, just listen to your body for a moment. How do you feel when he plays the radio late at night? The student says, I feel pissed off. So again, he's finally getting to a place where he starts to own, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling pissed off. And the friend ends with, okay, there are other ways of saying it, but that's okay. So when you're communicating feelings, you're owning them. You're not putting judgments. So feelings can be used in a destructive way if we try to imply that other people's behavior are the cause of our feelings. The cause of our feelings is not other people's behavior, it's our needs. So that's an important part to remember here. It's not what other people do that can hurt you, it's how you take it, if that makes sense. So that's the feeling side. We'll move on to the next one. Back to Christie.
Okay, let's take a closer look at needs. So to tag on what Danelle was saying, our feelings are a lot of based on our needs, whether they're met or unmet. And we are not responsible for others' feelings. We can have compassion and concern, but we are not responsible. And that's a little bit of an emotional intelligence thing that it's kind of a higher up there because it's something that we can get caught into pretty easily. We feel responsible for how we've made others, what their experience is and things we've said, and that's not something we want to take on. You want to be responsible for your own reactions. Feelings can be used in a destructive way if we imply that someone's behavior is the cause, right? And that's where a lot of the barriers can come into play, and we get emotional and miss the messaging, and can get caught into a negative spiral within that conversation. So how you interpret the information is going to be important, and we want to be as clear as possible. The Nonviolent Communication Guide allows us to see the information and the message in a less defensive way. And so it's important to present it in a less defensive way so that it can be heard. And again, leading to more effective solution orientation and just getting your message across. So this is going to allow more growth in your performance, more growth in the relationship, more trust between you and your coaches and those you're around. One of the things that is important within our communication is really we want to be heard, right? And that is a need that we express. We want to feel heard and understood and validated. And if we can get some of those messages out in a very factual manner and just very non-threatening, then that message might be heard a little more, and the receiver is going to really feel that. So, we don't want to make the other person feel wrong, which is often what can happen. Now, as a receiver, sometimes we hear the messages that kind of minimize that need to feel heard. So some examples of messaging that we can give somebody is to give too much advice or give solutions when they're trying to just share their feelings or needs. And, it might be just like, well, why don't you just do that? Or, you should just do this. And so what that does is minimize them, that need for feeling understood. And so, that's going to erode some of that relationship, because they're going to say, I can't really go back to that person and talk to them because they don't really get me. They're not giving me the time. They're not really valuing what I'm saying and feeling. Another block to effective communication might be that probing question. Just really, instead of just listening to the person, describing their needs and feelings, and that you're just asking too many questions. Well, what did they say, or what happened there, or what did this? And then basically it kind of derails them just sharing what they really need to share. Another thing we might do is reassuring and sympathizing. But again, it ignores the person, what they're feeling, and what's causing them to feel misunderstood. So we might say something like, oh, don't worry, we'll make sure you're comfortable, or you'll feel better soon, you'll just be back to your old self, or it'll be fine, that sort of thing. So that reassuring is meant with good intent, but it doesn't really allow the athlete or coach to, again, feel really understood and validated. One of the other ones that can play a role is when we preach. You've got to relax. You shouldn't be doing that. This is fun. You should be having fun. You're kind of preaching and telling them. Again, that's going to make them feel wrong. Arguing or just being, even denying somebody's feelings and needs is going to be a very difficult communication step to surpass, because again, it's just not going to lead to any positive solutions and allow the receiver the courage to continue that conversation. So those are some very important blocks that do come up quite often. So I want you guys to think about how you experience some of those, how many times you've heard coaches maybe minimize, or a parent minimize, or even you minimizing some conversations that your teammates bring to you. So pay attention to how you respond. So we'll continue to talk through some of the examples of how we can respond better. So one way to do that is to go into the request side of things.
Okay, thanks, Christie, for that so far. And just to summarize, I think since a few of you did write down some examples of approaching your coach in the best way about a certain technique or a method, and without knowing exactly what you're referring to, I know that can be difficult to, in that scenario, to go to your coach and say, hey, this isn't working with me. So just so far, the way we might go through this is when you teach me this technique, or when you coach with this particular method, so that's the observation, dropping into the feeling, you might be saying, I'm feeling confused, I'm misunderstood, or I don't understand, or I'm feeling I'm not connecting with it. So whatever number of feelings might come up with you, and then the need might be, I need you to try explaining it in a different way for me, or I need you to show me on video, or I need us to sit down and talk about ways that this method or technique could work better. So then that's leading into the specific request. Is the more specific you can be about the concrete actions that you feel you would like to be taken in that scenario. So maybe I kind of mix those two together as far as the need. I need to understand, but then the concrete action would be things like I need us to sit down and talk about this, or like the specific request. Could you try a different way of explaining this to me? And so the more specific you can be, the better. So some examples of a vague request for something to change would be, I want you to understand me. So that's a bit vague, but if you request, I want you to tell me what you heard me say, that's more specific. If you're talking to a coach or a teammate, you might say something, a vague request would be, I'd like you to be honest with me about yesterday's meeting. More specific request would be, I want you to tell me how you feel about what I did and what you'd like me to do differently. You might say vaguely to a friend or teammate, I'd like to get to know you better, even on the positive side. More specific request might be, I'd like you to tell me if you'd be willing to meet for lunch once a week. um, a coach might say, or someone at home or with your parents, you might say, I would like you to show respect for my privacy. That's kind of vague, but you can get more specific. Say to your mom or dad, I'd like you to agree to knock before you enter my room. So the more specific request you can be, the more clear your communication will be, and the more it's easy for someone to actually respond to that request. So those are some examples. So the more concrete and specific. Sometimes we avoid the uncomfortableness by kind of being a little bit vague, but if you actually think, what is it that I would really like to happen? And that takes a bit more thoughtfulness and then communicating that. So we'll just go on to the fifth step before we try and bring this whole process together with some more examples. So back to Christie.
Okay, that's a really nice setup. That specific request is also going to play out in obtaining the feedback. So that last piece of this is really just checking in. Checking in, did the receiver understand the message? Did you explain it properly? I do that a lot when I'm talking to clients, and it's very important that I make sure that they understand what I am trying to convey. So we do want to take that extra step to ask and just to be, understand if it was clear to them, or also see their interpretation, because it could be quite different from what you were intending. So it is really important to, let's say at the end of that request, to go in and say, would you be willing, can you just tell me what you heard from me? Or did I, even just casually, did I say that right? Or did that make sense? Or can you repeat back to me what I said? I just want to make sure that I got that right for you. And so what they can give you back will really show you how that message was transmitted, let's say. So remember, there's a lot of room for errors. There's a lot of room for breakdown in that message. So it is really important that you do ask for clarity. So if you are, I think one of the interesting things about the athlete coach dynamic is, there is usually the coach is usually in that position of authority. So it's not always easy to ask them to do this, because it's just not our usual practice. But you can ask the coach, hey, going on that example that Danelle was saying about perhaps, not understanding a way a coach is teaching you something, you can say, it would be really helpful for me if you could show me in a different way. And I'm quite confused when we've gone over this. Is it possible that you could, maybe teach another way? And does that make sense? Does it make sense what I'm asking? And then the coach would hopefully reflect that back and just say, yes, you want me to try to figure out another way. So, that would be a pretty straightforward way to do it. I know there's a lot of challenges with that, either with the dynamic or, I'll hear a lot of clients say, well, I've already asked a couple times and I still don't get it, so I'm not going to ask again. But there is that moment where, you're the one that's being asked to compete and perform. So it is important to get over that step. So that obtaining feedback is going to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Great. Okay, let's now that we've gone through the 5 steps, again, I just remind you that if you have any questions at any time or comments, feel free to throw them up in the chat. But we're going to use a really simple scenario that I think most of us can relate to put this whole process together, whether it's at work, sport, at home. Imagine you're rushing to make it to a 9 a.m. meeting with a specific person you know. You can even think of someone that might come to mind, whether it's a friend, a coach, a teacher, a family member. And you're really excited to get there and get going and get things done because you've got a lot going on in your day and you've got a busy life and you got to get to training, you got to get to school, and you just have an hour and you're excited to maximize this hour with this person. So you get there at 8:58, ready to go, and the other person arrives 9:10. So you're just sitting there waiting. So think, maybe you can even throw some things out in the chat. What is the first things that just like popcorn words? What are you feeling and thinking by the time this person in your life arrives 10 to 15 minutes late? Am I muted? Oh. You can unmute me. Am I unmuted? You're unmuted. Okay, great. So I was talking to mute, but I'm back. So disappointed, annoyed. Oh, you're considering the other person, Rhonda. They're feeling rushed and need a minute to relax. Are you not annoyed at all? So these are some thoughts that first things what comes to mind. So yeah, it can go either way. Whoops, pardon me. So a few more typing. So yeah, you might be questioning, why were they late? Was it because this meeting was not important to them as it was to you? So that's right. We start to make some observations. Observation that they're late. We might say evaluations might be, oh, they don't care about me enough to come here. What a jerk. They're being selfish. They're being rude, untimely, disorganized. All sorts of things can come to mind as how we evaluate the lateness. And go ahead, keep typing. I can see some people are still typing, but some strategies when this person arrives. You might use sarcasm. You might frown at them. You might demand an apology for being late. You might avoid the fact that you're upset with that they're late. You might speak in more clipped tones, or you might actually express your feelings, which is the point of this approach to nonviolent communication. So when you think of the first kind of thoughts or feelings that come to mind, is thinking, okay, what is behind that? So what are the needs if you're feeling disappointed that they're late, you're annoyed, just addressing what is my feeling here? I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm anxious because there's a lot I want to talk to this person about. Now we're out of time. And how might you act to this person as a result? So that's getting down into what are the needs that aren't being met. You want to be able to trust this person. You want to have your time respected. You have needs to be productive. So just kind of going through this process and saying in a nonviolent communication way is to just observe without evaluating, without using indirect things such as strategies of frowning or getting angry, but saying, okay, what is the feeling and the need that you have? So to illustrate this on a target is to listen and communicate and express beyond these judgments and evaluations or maybe unhelpful strategies that trying to get to the needs underneath. So the more you can speak directly to what you observed and how you're feeling about it and what you need, then you can create strategies and requests that meet everyone's needs in non-judgmental, open, empathetic ways. So that's just sort of an illustration of it. So we've got a little, and again, this is not an easy process. I should have emphasized from the beginning to go through these 5 steps. It sounds great, when you can say, when I observe this or when I see you doing this, I feel this because I have a need for X, Y, Z. Could you consider whatever your request is? And that's the basis of it. And I think the next slide, I'll go one ahead, is our quick cheat sheet. But it takes lots of practice, and it doesn't come naturally for most of us to speak this way. So just remembering that, but it is a guideline that we're giving you to try out. Try out with your friends, try out with your parents, try with your coaches, and just kind of see what kind of responses you might get. So it's a good way to look at how to avoid, I think one of you mentioned, like, avoid defensiveness, and help create an open conversation. And here on this other slide I've got up here, it's kind of busy, but it's a bit of a cheat sheet as for those types of steps. So on the left, we've got, the observations, your objective description of the situation, avoiding interpretation, labeling, judging, evaluating. F for feeling, avoiding words that are just I think, but actually getting to the feelings. Addressing what is the need behind the feeling, what are you actually needing, and then translating that into a specific request. So another example of a slide to go through this process.
Yeah, it's the point. What we're trying to do is to allow you to have to create a safe space to have those conversations and to keep people from getting into a blocked defensive mode. We want to also be able to respond and speak in a way that is not reactive. So it allows you time to just approach it in a very response, thought out manner. The cheat sheet is helpful, and we, this is a kind of an in-depth process, but we can simplify it down to that very simple just method of, hey, if you can remember to just say, keep that observation. Let's go to the slide. There you go. Thank you. Just keep that very simple of, when I observe this, I'm feeling confused, I'm not clear, and it would really be helpful if you could, do this because I need to hear that this way, or I need to see it done this way, and that'll really allow me to get it. So it's just kind of shows every part of this process. Another way you could just even simplify it further is just to make that into 3 steps, where again, it starts with the observation. I've seen you arrive late to practice, and I'm curious if that's because you are having troubles getting here, or if you're oversleeping, or if you're not motivated. Maybe you can help me understand what's actually going on. So it's more of an approach of a healthy curiosity and just trying to show understanding and empathy rather than accusatory and just already starting off on a difficult foot, especially if that dynamic if there is a bit of a power dynamic, or if there's negative history between the two people. Again, we want to preserve that relationship to provide trust so that both of you, the people in the conversation can grow and keep moving forward. I wanted to be sure that we did address some of those questions that were brought up to us. So let's have a little bit of a look here. We've got a little bit of time still, so I think we've kind of given some of those examples. How to talk, here's a great one. How to talk with your parents about how you feel training is going when they're very hard on you. That is a very common one to bring up, because parents often have our best intentions in mind, but they also have their own expectations. And if we oftentimes we don't feel like we're meeting their expectations. So having a conversation is just, you could start that off by just saying, hey, it's been pretty tough for me, so I was hoping we could sort of talk about this, because I would really appreciate your support, and you can identify some of the support that they have given. That could be that observation. And then you could go into, but what I could really use is you just cheering me on, or, not paying so much attention to the result, or just not comparing me to others. So you can sort of identify that piece that is troublesome for you, and just say, my request would be, I'd love for you to be coming to my competition and watching, but if you could just observe and just give me a hug when it's done, and then we can talk about it another time. So that would incorporate that request as well. And it also gives the receiver, your parents, a specific direction to go in, and a behavior to think about. So a lot, I think we both hear that in our practice of just kids not feeling like they can have this conversation with their parents. And hopefully, like I said, it depends on how it's approached. Many parents might not be open to it if the kid just comes back and says, stop bugging me, so you want to set the tone to say, hey, I'd like to talk about this because it's a problem, and I want to feel better about it, and I know you guys can help me with it. So asking for somebody's help kind of gets them into that space to offer some of those solutions. Yeah, and just coming through negatively again, it is sometimes also helpful to incorporate a third party, perhaps a coach or somebody like myself or Danelle. We're often in that sort of triad, if you will. We can have coach, athlete, parent discussions where we can help facilitate some of this and keep everybody emotionally in check, and just confirming and reflecting some of the conversations. So sometimes it might be beneficial to bring somebody else into that process if you don't feel comfortable, or if that's not something, if the conversation isn't going anywhere. So you might want to consider that as a possible solution. Let's see. Let's have another. These are really great. The defensiveness. Yeah, Diane, great question. Defensiveness, timing, perhaps a lack of self-awareness. These are all, again, this is such a complex topic. These are all great pieces that can really work or not. The timing is very important. What comes to my mind the most, again, is if we go back to that parents-child role in the car ride home from a practice or a game. The timing of that communication of, let's say the parent wants to share their excitement or thoughts and opinions about the game or the performance of an athlete, the timing may not be appropriate to be doing it in the car. Often we want to read the sort of the body language and the emotions that we're getting from the receiver, and try to understand when it might be most valuable to receive that message. So the timing is going to be important. Some people that aren't as self-aware of what they're doing and how it's affecting others, this is where that observation piece can come in very handy and say, these are some things that I've observed, and this is how it's impacting. So this is not they're not ever going to get defensive kind of process, but it sure does set the tone in a healthier way than coming right out and saying, you do this all the time, because that is going to be evaluative and judgmental. So, this isn't saying that things aren't going to be perfect, but it sure is a good start. So, Danelle, you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, like I mentioned a little earlier, it can sound very simple, but it's hard to put it into practice. And for any of you on the call who are parents or coaches or even young athletes who might do some babysitting with young children, sometimes I think a childlike example is a way of seeing it in a simple way, and most of us can probably remember moments from our parents or in childhood where we might have been evaluated or judged or criticized and how that made us feel. So think about a young child, say a toddler, drawing on the wall with crayons and pens. And if you were using this process in a negative, maybe violent way, you might say, what's wrong with you? You're always drawing on the wall. You're never good. Those kind of things could come out. But if you're practicing nonviolent communication, you might start with observation. I see you've been drawing on the wall. When I see you drawing on the wall, I get frustrated, or I feel angry, or I'm upset. And I need you to take your crayons and draw on the paper. Would you be willing, next time you feel the urge to be creative and make some art, to go use the table and the paper I've set out for you? And then I guess that fifth step, did you understand what I heard you say? And so sometimes going back to how you might approach a young child is a way to say, am I expressing this clearly? As we grow up and we become adults, we get sort of more complicated in the way we say things, and we're not as direct and honest sometimes as children are. And so even the way we communicate to children can be simple like this. And so remembering to go back to that simplicity, even though we're using perhaps more complicated dynamics and situations and scenarios. That was just another example I wanted to throw out there. So I see we've got about 7 minutes left. Christie's just going to add something.
Yep, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying there. I think with this approach too, we've really kind of focused it on you expressing your need and communicating, as the person asking, mentioning the observations and talking about your feelings and needs. But this is also a good process to use for getting someone else on board and on the same page, so you can ask them the same things. What are you observing? I'm thinking of maybe coaches talking to parents, or even athletes talking to coaches. Well, what are you observing from me, and how does that make you feel? And what are the needs that you're looking for, and how can we kind of come together and work to find a solution? So it's a good process for you as the speaker and the communicator to be asking for something, but it also acknowledges what the other person is looking for as well. So that can help, again, come to a more collaborative solution rather than just being one way. So it's a good process in simplicity that way, to make sure that everybody, again, goes back to that basic need of feeling validated and heard. So it's a good opportunity to follow along. Yeah, I guess are there any other questions or clarity? It's been fun passing microphones back and forth, and you guys have been really great, and hopefully it sounded okay. And a lot of this made sense. See, there's my reflection asking if it was clear for you. If it's not, for sure, you can pose another question to us in the time we have. But yeah, it just you guys have put some good questions, and I'm hoping you're taking away some answers and some place to start to have this conversation with some people.
All right, thank you, ladies. I'll leave the last couple minutes for any other questions that might arise for you guys. Danelle, Christie, that was great. I love discussing communication. It is amazing. These two ladies are giggling over here. So I think they had some fun. Yeah. We'll be releasing this recorded session in the next week. Anytime we record one of these presentations, we'll send an email to our registered coaches and athletes. I'll probably put it up on social media that it's available to give you awareness that it's been released. But if anybody wants this PowerPoint presentation or has questions for Christie or Danelle, shoot me an email and I can connect you with them or send you this PowerPoint. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for tonight's session. I hope you learned as much as I did about communication in sport. Stay tuned for our next speaker series and have a fabulous evening, everybody. Thanks very much.